Welcome back, everyone. No matter where you are, no matter what time it may be, I hope you are all doing well out there. What I have for you tonight are experiences sent in to me by people just like you. These aren't campfire tales or works of fiction. They are raw, first-hand accounts of events that defy easy explanation. There are no neat conclusions here, and I am not trying to push any specific belief. My role is simply to provide a platform for these individuals to be heard, to share the weight of what they've carried. If you have had an encounter you cannot explain and wish to share it, the email address is in the description below this video. Your anonymity will always be respected. Now, for all of you who have been waiting, grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights, and let's get started. I am not a writer. I need to get that out of the way right now. I work with my hands, always have. I am a mechanic, and before that, I did framing and roofing. I do not have a way with words, so I am just going to tell you what happened, exactly as it happened, as best as I can remember it. Some of the details are burned into my mind so clearly it feels like it was yesterday, while other parts are blurry, like a dream you are trying to hold on to as you wake up. The fear, though, the fear is never blurry. This happened to me 7 years ago. I was 22 at the time, living at home with my parents in southern Ohio, down in the foothills of Appalachia. If you are not from around here, it is hard to describe. It is a place of deep hollers and winding back roads where the woods are thick and old. People think of Ohio as flat cornfields, and a lot of it is, but not where I am from. Here, the hills roll on forever, and the forest can swallow you up if you are not careful. I grew up in these woods. My dad had me in a deer stand with him before I was old enough to hold a rifle properly. I knew the sounds, the smells, the feeling of the forest at every time of day and in every season. It was my backyard. I was never afraid of it. Respectful, yes. You have to respect a place that can get you lost or hurt in a heartbeat. But I was never afraid. It was familiar. It was home. That feeling is gone now. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The air had that crisp bite to it that promises winter is not far off. The leaves were mostly down, carpeting the forest floor in a thick layer of brown and orange that crunched underfoot. I was driving home from my buddy's house. His name is Kyle. We had been working on his project car, a beat-up old Mustang he was trying to bring back to life. It was late, probably close to midnight. I was tired, covered in a thin layer of grease and dirt, and I just wanted to get home to my bed. To get to my parents' house from Kyle's, you could take the state highway, which was longer but well lit and paved, or you could take a series of county roads and township roads that cut through the hills. It was a shortcut, shaving a good 15 minutes off the drive. I had driven it hundreds, maybe thousands of times in my life. I knew every curve, every pothole, every place where the deer were likely to jump out in front of you. The road I am talking about is called Sulphur Creek Road. It is mostly gravel, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, and it winds its way through a deep valley with a thick state forest on either side. There are no houses on it for a stretch of about 5 miles. No lights, just you, your headlights, and the dark woods pressing in on both sides. That night, I was in my old pickup truck, a late 90s Ford, rusted out and beat to hell, but it was reliable. I had the windows down a crack, letting the cold night air whip through the cab, and the radio was on low, playing some classic rock station. Everything was normal, completely, utterly normal. I turned onto Sulphur Creek Road, the tires spitting gravel, and settled in for the last leg of my drive home. The moon was nearly full, and it cast a pale, silvery light over everything, making the bare trees look like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. It was quiet, peaceful even. I was about halfway through the 5-mile stretch of nothingness when it happened. A loud bang, followed by the truck lurching violently to the right. Then the rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of a flat tire. I cursed under my breath. Of all the places for this to happen. I pulled over as far as I could, which was not very far. The shoulder was narrow, just a thin strip of grass and dirt before the ditch and the tree line. I put the truck in park, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment in the sudden silence. The radio died with the engine, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling motor and the chirping of crickets in the woods. It was not a big deal. Annoying for sure, but not a disaster. I had changed plenty of tires in my life. I had a full-size spare and all the tools I needed. I grabbed the heavy maglite from under my seat, clicked it on, and stepped out of the truck. The beam cut a bright white cone through the darkness. I walked around to the passenger side. Sure enough, the front tire was completely flat, shredded. I must have hit a sharp rock or a piece of metal on the road. I sighed, the sound loud in the stillness, my breath pluming in the cold air. No use putting it off. I got the jack and the tire iron out from behind the seat and went to work. The lug nuts were stubborn, rusted on. I had to put my whole body weight into the tire iron, grunting with the effort. The metallic screech of the nut finally breaking loose echoed in the quiet valley. One by one, I got them off. I jacked up the truck, the rhythmic clanking of the jack handle the only sound I was making. It was as I was pulling the ruined tire off the axle that I noticed it. The silence. It was not the normal quiet of the woods at night. It was a dead silence. The crickets had stopped. The usual night birds were quiet. There was not even the sound of the wind in the trees. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. I have spent enough time in the woods to know that silence like that means one thing. A predator is nearby. A coyote, a bobcat, maybe even a black bear, though they were not super common in our area. Whatever it was big enough to make every other creature in the vicinity hold its breath and hope it passed by. I froze, still holding the heavy tire, and listened. Nothing, just a profound, unnatural stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly straightened up and shined my maglite into the woods on the other side of the road. The beam cut through the first layer of trees, illuminating pale trunks and the carpet of dead leaves. I scanned the darkness, looking for the telltale glint of eyeshine. Nothing. I swept the light back and forth, slowly, methodically. Still nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably just a coyote passing through. They were usually more scared of people than we were of them. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and get back to work. I rolled the flat tire to the back of the truck and leaned it against the tailgate. Then I wrestled the heavy spare out of its cradle underneath the truck bed. It was awkward and heavy, and I was grunting and cursing as I tried to line it up with the wheel studs. My back was to the woods on the passenger side of the road now, and that is when I smelled it. It was a smell unlike anything I had ever smelled before. It was heavy, musky, and foul, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead, but 100 times stronger. It was a rank, primal smell of filth and decay, and something else, something wild and gamey. It hit the back of my throat and made me gag. My head snapped up. The smell was coming from the woods, from the direction of the deep silence. My heart started hammering in my chest. This was not a coyote. I have been around coyotes my whole life. They can smell a little rank, sure, but nothing like this. This was something else. My mind started racing. A bear? Maybe. A big boar could smell pretty bad. A wild hog? We had some of those around, and they were nasty. But the smell, it did not quite fit. It was too canine. I dropped the spare tire. It hit the gravel with a dull thud. I grabbed my mag light from the ground where I had set it and slowly, deliberately turned around. I shined the light back into the trees, my hand trembling slightly. The beam danced and shook as I swept it across the impenetrable blackness of the forest. I held my breath, listening, and then I heard it. A sound. It was a heavy, deliberate snap, the sound of a thick branch breaking under a great weight. It was close, way too close, maybe 30 yards into the woods. My blood ran cold. I was not imagining things. There was something in there, something big. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and shaky. Stupid! Why did I do that? If it was a person, they would have answered. If it was an animal, I had just announced my exact location. Silence. The only answer was the thumping of my own heart in my ears. I kept the light pointed in the direction of the sound, my knuckles white as I gripped the heavy metal flashlight. It was the only thing I had that could be used as a weapon. I slowly started backing away towards the open driver's side door of my truck. My brain was screaming at me, "Get in the truck, get in the truck and go." But my feet felt like they were stuck in mud. I could not take my eyes off the spot where the sound had come from. I took another step back. My heel hit the spare tire, and I stumbled, catching myself on the side of the truck. The movement must have been what triggered it, because that is when I saw it. It was not a sudden appearance. It was a slow, deliberate movement. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows of the trees, a patch of blackness that was darker than the surrounding night. It stepped from behind a thick oak tree into the edge of my flashlight beam, and my mind simply stopped working. It could not process what my eyes were seeing. It was tall, impossibly tall. My first thought was that it was a man, a very large man in some kind of costume. But that thought lasted for only a fraction of a second. The proportions were all wrong. It was standing on 2 legs, but they were not human legs. They were bent backwards, like a dog's, with prominent hocks. It was covered in coarse, dark fur. Not black, but a deep, dirty charcoal gray. It was massive. The shoulders were incredibly broad, wider than any man I had ever seen. The arms were long, too long for the body, and they ended in what looked like large clawed hands, but it was the head that broke my reality. It was the head of a wolf, or a German shepherd. A long snout filled with teeth that I could see glinting even from that distance. Pointed ears stood erect on top of its head, swiveling slightly, independently of each other, tuning in to the night. And the eyes. The flashlight beam caught them, and they glowed with a sickening, yellowish-green light. They were not the passive, reflective eyes of a deer or a cat. They were intelligent. They were looking right at me, and they were full of a cold, calculating malice that I have no words to describe. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. Me, frozen in terror, with my useless flashlight beam trembling on its form. And it, standing just inside the tree line, perfectly still, watching me. It was not a bear. A bear does not have a canine snout. A bear does not have legs that bend that way. It was not a man in a suit. A man in a suit does not move with that kind of fluid, predatory grace. A man in a suit does not have eyes that glow with their own internal light. This was something else, something that should not exist. The foul, gagging smell I had noticed earlier now washed over me in a wave. It was coming from the creature, the smell of wet fur and rot and blood. My body finally remembered how to move. The survival instinct, buried deep in the primitive part of my brain, took over. I did not think. I just reacted. I dropped the flashlight, plunging myself into near darkness. I scrambled backwards, crab-walking away from it, my hands scraping on the sharp gravel. I fumbled for the door handle of my truck, my eyes still locked on the silhouette of the thing at the edge of the woods. It had not moved. It was just watching me, letting me see it. I found the handle, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, landing awkwardly across the bench seat. I slammed the door shut and fumbled for the lock, plunging the button down with a satisfying click. My keys. Where were my keys? I had taken them out of the ignition. My pockets. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get them into my jeans. I could not find them. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I was trapped. I was in a metal box, but I was trapped. I risked a glance out the passenger window. It was still there, but it was not still anymore. It had taken a step out of the woods, one slow, deliberate step onto the grassy shoulder of the road. It was even bigger than I had thought. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It moved with a terrifying confidence, like it owned this road, this forest, this night, like I was nothing more than a mouse it had cornered. My fingers finally closed around the familiar cold metal of my keys in my right pocket. I ripped them out, my hand shaking so violently that I dropped them on the floor mat. I sobbed, a raw, terrified sound torn from my throat. I bent down, my eyes still trying to watch the creature, and fumbled in the darkness of the cab. My fingers brushed against them. I snatched them up. My hand flew to the ignition. I could not get the key in the slot. It was like trying to thread a needle in an earthquake. Outside, the thing took another step, and another. It was in the road now, its form illuminated by the pale moonlight. I could see the muscles ripple under its dark fur as it moved. It was not rushing. It was taking its time. It knew I was not going anywhere. Finally, the key slid into the ignition. I twisted it. The engine turned over, coughed, and died. My heart stopped. No, 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 not now. The truck was old, but it had never done that before. I tried again. Grind, 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 cough. Nothing? The creature was halfway across the road. It was walking directly towards my driver's side door. I could hear its claws making a faint scratching, clicking sound on the gravel. I closed my eyes and prayed to a God I had not spoken to in years. Please, please just start. I turned the key one more time. The engine roared to life. The headlights flashed on, bathing the creature in brilliant, sudden light. It was 10 feet from my door. For a split second, I saw it in perfect, horrifying detail. The fur was matted and patchy in places, showing glimpses of gray, leathery skin beneath. The snout was long and wet, the lips pulled back in a silent snarl, revealing yellowed fangs. The eyes, caught in the headlights, burned with a furious, intelligent hatred. It threw one of its long arms up to shield its face from the light, and, in that moment, it looked shockingly, terrifyingly human. I did not wait. I slammed the gear shift into drive, my foot stomping the gas pedal to the floor. The truck fishtailed on the loose gravel, the one good front tire fighting for traction. The engine screamed in protest. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was not going to move. But then the tires bit, and the truck shot forward. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I could not. I was afraid of what I would see. I drove like a madman, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my body rigid with terror. The truck bounced and slid on the gravel road, but I did not slow down. I left my jack, my tire iron, and my ruined tires sitting in the middle of that dark road. I did not care. I just drove. I did not slow down until I hit the paved county road, until I could see the comforting glow of a distant farmhouse light. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I remember pulling into my driveway, the crunch of the gravel under my one good tire sounding impossibly loud. I remember stumbling into the house. My parents were already asleep and locking the door behind me. I checked every window and every lock in the house. Twice. I went to my room and sat on my bed, shaking uncontrollably. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing, hateful eyes. I saw that long canine snout. I could smell that foul, rotten meat and wet dog smell, as if the creature were in the room with me. The sun came up, and it brought no comfort. The world outside my window looked the same, but it was not. It was different now. The familiar woods that bordered our property were no longer a place of comfort and adventure. They were a place of shadows and hidden things, a place to be feared. My dad found me in the kitchen a few hours later, staring into a cup of coffee I had not touched. He asked me what was wrong. He pointed out that I was pale as a ghost. He asked where my other tire was and why the jack was missing. I tried to tell him. I tried to explain what I had seen. The words came out in a jumbled, panicked rush. I talked about the height, the legs, the wolf head, the smell. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from concern to confusion, and then to a kind of weary pity. When I was done, he clapped me on the shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice gentle, "you were tired. It was dark. You probably saw a big black bear standing up on its hind legs." "No, Dad," I insisted. "It wasn't a bear. I know what a bear looks like. This was different. It had a snout, like a dog." "A trick of the light," he said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "The mind plays tricks on you when you're scared and alone in the dark. You probably got spooked by a coyote, and your imagination ran away with you." He told me we would go back and get my tools later that morning. I refused. I told him I was never going back down that road again. He just shook his head, like he was dealing with a child who had just had a nightmare. He went by himself a few hours later. He came back with the jack, the tire iron, and the flat tire. He said there was nothing there, no tracks, no sign of anything unusual. Of course there were no tracks. The road was hard-packed gravel and dirt. It would not have left any clear prints. His disbelief was worse than the fear in some ways. It made me feel alone. It made me feel like I was going crazy. Did I imagine it? For a few days, I tried to convince myself that he was right, that I was just tired and scared, and my mind had conjured a monster out of shadows and fear. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe the strange legs were just a weird angle. Maybe the snout was a branch or a shadow that made it look that way. But I could not make it fit. The image was burned into my brain. The intelligence in those eyes. The deliberate way it moved. The way it had held its arm up to shield its face from my headlights. Animals do not do that. Bears do not do that. A week later, I knew I was not crazy. I had not been able to sleep properly since the incident. I would jolt awake at the slightest sound, my heart pounding. I kept the blinds in my bedroom closed tight. I had started sleeping with a loaded shotgun next to my bed. My parents were worried about me. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. One night I was woken up by our dogs. We had 2 beagles we kept in a pen in the backyard. They were good hunting dogs, but they were also lazy and quiet most of the time. That night they were going ballistic. Not their usual excited yapping when a raccoon or a possum wanders by. This was a different sound. It was a sound of pure terror, high-pitched, screaming barks and panicked whimpers. I sat bolt upright in bed, my blood turning to ice. I grabbed the shotgun and crept to my window. My room overlooked the backyard. I carefully pulled back the edge of the blind and looked out. My dad had installed a motion-activated security light on the back of the house a few years earlier. It was on, flooding the yard with a harsh white light. The dog pen was at the far edge of the yard, right up against the tree line. The 2 dogs were huddled together in the corner of the pen furthest from the woods, cowering and crying. They were staring at the dark tree line. I followed their gaze, my heart in my throat. And I saw it again. It was standing just inside the woods, partially hidden by the trunk of a massive pine tree. It was just a silhouette against the blackness, but I knew what it was. That impossible height, those broad shoulders, the distinct shape of that canine head with its pointed ears. It was watching the house. It was watching the dogs. It was watching me. I do not know how long I stood there, paralyzed, the cold stock of the shotgun pressed against my cheek. It felt like hours. The creature did not move. It just stood there, a silent, terrifying sentinel at the edge of my world. It knew where I lived. That thought was more terrifying than anything else. It had followed me, or it had always been here, and I had just been too blind to see it. I finally found my nerve. I raised the shotgun, my finger finding the safety. I was not going to be a victim. I was in my own home. I slid the window open as quietly as I could. The cold night air hit my face. The sound of the dog's terrified whimpering was louder now. I rested the barrel of the gun on the windowsill and took aim at the dark shape in the trees. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. As if it could read my mind, The creature turned its head and looked directly at my window. I could not see its eyes from that distance, but I could feel them. I felt its gaze lock onto me, a physical pressure, and then it did something that chilled me to the bone. It raised one of its long arms and pointed. Not at the dogs. Not at the house in general. It pointed directly at my window, directly at me. It was a clear, unmistakable gesture. "I see you." Then, as slowly and silently as it had appeared, it stepped back, melting into the shadows of the pine tree, and was gone. The dogs continued to cry for another 10 minutes, and then they fell silent. I stayed at that window until the sun came up, shotgun in my hands, watching the tree line. It did not reappear. The next day, I started making changes. I bought more floodlights and installed them all around the house, pointing out into the woods. I reinforced the locks on the doors and windows. I convinced my dad to let me bring the dogs inside at night. He thought I was being paranoid, but he saw how genuinely terrified I was, and he relented. I stopped going out after dark unless I absolutely had to. I sold my hunting rifles. I had no desire to ever step foot in those woods again. My life was turned upside down. The easy comfort I had always felt in my rural home was gone, replaced by a constant, low-grade fear. I became a prisoner of my own home after sunset. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves outside was a potential threat. My friends noticed the change. I stopped going out with them at night. I made excuses. I told Kyle I was sick or that I had to work early. How could I explain to them that I was afraid of a monster in the woods? They would have laughed at me, just like my dad had. The isolation was profound. I was carrying this terrifying secret, this world-shattering knowledge, and I had no one to share it with. To everyone else, the world was the same as it had always been. To me, the veil had been lifted. I had seen what lurked in the darkness just beyond the reach of the street lights and porch lights, and I knew that it was intelligent, that it was malevolent, and that it was aware of me. I lived like that for 2 years. 2 years of constant vigilance and fear. I never saw the creature again, but I felt its presence. There were nights when the woods would go dead silent, just like that first night on the road. Nights when the dogs, now sleeping in the house, would press against my bedroom door and let out low, guttural growls at something outside that I could not see. I found tracks once. It was after a light snow. I was checking the perimeter of the yard, something I did every morning, and there, just at the edge of the woods, was a single perfect print in the snow. It was huge, much larger than any wolf or dog print. It was canine, but it had a strange shape to it. The heel was elongated, more like a human footprint. It was a single track, as if the creature had stepped out of the woods, left one print as a calling card, and then stepped back. I took a picture of it with my phone. I still have it. It is blurry and does not do it justice, but it is proof. Proof to myself that I am not crazy. When I was 24, I moved out of my parents' house. I could not take it anymore. I needed to be away from those woods. I got an apartment in a small town about 30 miles away. It is not a city, but there are streetlights and neighbors close by. The woods are not pressing in on my back door every night. It helped. The constant sharp edge of fear has dulled to a persistent, dull ache. But it never goes away completely. I still check my locks 3 times before I go to bed. I do not like to be outside after dark. I have never been back to my parents' house for more than a few hours during the daytime. I will not stay there overnight. My relationship with my father has been strained ever since. He thinks I abandoned him and my mom. He does not understand that I had to leave to save my own sanity. I have tried to find answers. I have spent countless hours online, late at night, when the fear is at its worst. I have read stories from all over the country, stories that are chillingly similar to my own. People describing a tall bipedal canine creature, the same details over and over, the backward bent legs, the long arms, the wolf-like head, the glowing eyes, the overwhelming foul smell. They call it Dogman. Finding those other stories was both a comfort and a terror. It was a comfort to know that I am not the only one, that I am not insane. But it was a terror to realize that this thing is real, that it is not just some local boogeyman haunting the back roads of my little corner of Ohio. It is out there, in the dark places, all across the country, watching, waiting. I am 30 years old now. I have a decent life, a good job, a few friends, but I am damaged. That night on Sulphur Creek Road broke something inside of me that I do not think will ever fully heal. It shattered my understanding of the world. We live in a bubble of perceived safety, a thin veneer of civilization spread over a world that is ancient, wild, and full of things we do not understand. That night, my bubble popped. I am sharing this story because I need to. I have carried it alone for too long. I am not trying to convince anyone. If you do not believe me, I understand. A few years ago, I would not have believed me either. I would have said it was a bear or a trick of the light. But I was there. I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. And I know the fear that it instilled in me is real. My warning to you is this: be careful in the wild places. Do not assume you are at the top of the food chain. Do not think that just because you have a gun or a flashlight, you are safe. There are things in the woods that are older and stronger than you can imagine. Things that defy our neat little categories of what is real and what is not. And if you are ever out on a dark road late at night and the woods suddenly go silent, do not get out of your car. Just keep driving and pray that whatever is out there in the darkness lets you go. My name has been withheld by request. I have to say a genuine thank you to the person who trusted me with their experience. That kind of raw honesty takes a tremendous amount of courage, and I know I speak for everyone listening when I say we appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who took the time to listen tonight. It means more than you know that you choose to spend your time here. I read the comments on the videos, and I am consistently impressed by the level of respect and thoughtful discussion that happens there. You all have built a community where people can share these terrifying, life-altering events without fear of ridicule. And that is a rare and valuable thing. So, thank you. If you found value in these stories, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone you think might appreciate it. And if you are new here and want to hear more accounts like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications. As always, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Watch over your loved ones and keep your head on a swivel. Stay safe out there. Until next time, my friends. Good night. Welcome back, everyone. I'm so glad you could join me tonight. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time it may be where you are, I truly hope you're doing well out there. I hope life is treating you kindly. We have a few stories for you tonight, and as always, I want to be clear about what you're about to hear. These are not my stories. They are sent in by listeners, by people just like you, regular people who have had experiences that they can't explain, experiences that have stayed with them. There are no neat and tidy conclusions here. We aren't pushing any one belief or explanation. We are simply providing a space for these accounts to be shared, to be heard, word for word, just as they were written. If you have an experience of your own that you'd like to share, my email address is in the description below. I read every single one. Now, for everyone who is ready, find a quiet place, grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights, and let's get started. My name is Mark, and I'm 42 years old now. This happened when I was 38. It's taken me 4 years to even be able to write this down. My brother Chris and we were always close. Growing up, we did everything together. As adults, life got in the way. Jobs, families, responsibilities. But we made a pact. Once a year, every year, we'd go camping. Just the two of us. It was our tradition. It was our way of reconnecting with each other and with the wild. We were experienced campers. I'm not talking about going to a state park with numbered sites and public restrooms. I'm talking about deep woods, backcountry camping. We'd been doing it since we were teenagers. We knew what we were doing. We knew the sounds of the forest at night. We knew the animals. We knew how to read the signs, or at least we thought we did. That year, we decided on a spot in the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. It was a place we'd been to a couple of times before. Remote. You had to drive my old pickup down a series of increasingly rough Forest Service roads, and then the last few miles were on a trail that was barely there. Most people wouldn't even attempt it. That's why we liked it. It was quiet. It was ours. The drive-in was normal. We were laughing, listening to music, catching up. The air was warm for October, and the leaves were just starting to turn. It was beautiful, perfect. We parked the truck in a small clearing and hiked about a half mile to our preferred spot. It was a small, flat area next to a clear, fast-running creek, surrounded by a thick forest of oak and hickory trees. We set up our camp just like we'd done 100 times before. We pitched the tent, a sturdy four-season dome tent. We unrolled our sleeping bags, organized our gear. Chris gathered firewood while I started clearing a small pit for the fire. There was a comfortable rhythm to it, an easy silence between us that only comes with family and long shared habits. We felt at home, safer in a way than we did back in the city. As the sun started to go down, the forest came alive with its usual evening chorus. Crickets started their chirping. Tree frogs called from the creek bank. A barred owl hooted somewhere off in the distance. It was the soundtrack to our escape. We got a good fire going. The flames danced and crackled, pushing back the growing darkness. We cooked hot dogs on sticks and drank a couple of beers. We talked about our kids, our jobs, old memories. Everything was exactly as it should be. It was perfect. And then it wasn't. It happened all at once. The sound just stopped. One moment, the woods were filled with the noise of a million tiny lives. The next, there was absolute, total silence. The crickets were gone. The frogs were gone. The owl was gone. Even the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed to have ceased. It was a heavy, oppressive silence. The kind of silence that you can feel in your ears. It was like someone had thrown a thick, soundproof blanket over the entire forest. Chris and I looked at each other across the fire. He had a confused look on his face. "Did you hear that?" he asked, but his voice was a low whisper. "Hear what?" I whispered back. "I don't hear anything. That's the problem." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was a primal, instinctual feeling, the feeling of being watched. I've felt it before when hunting. The feeling you get right before a deer steps out of the brush. But this was different. This wasn't the feeling of being watched by prey. This was the feeling of being watched by a predator. I slowly scanned the tree line, the wall of blackness just beyond the reach of our firelight. I couldn't see anything, just the dark shapes of trees. "Probably just a coyote or a bobcat moving through," Chris said, trying to sound casual. But his voice was tight. He was trying to convince himself as much as me. We both knew better. A single predator moving through doesn't silence the entire forest. Something large does, something threatening. "Maybe a bear," I offered, but my own voice lacked conviction. We'd seen bears before. They were loud. They crashed through the woods. They didn't move in total silence, and they didn't make the entire ecosystem hold its breath in terror. Then the smell hit us. It was vile. It rolled into our camp on a non-existent breeze. It was a thick, gag-inducing stench. The closest I can describe it is like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. A mix of wet, matted fur, garbage, and a coppery, metallic smell like old blood. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Chris gagged and covered his nose and mouth with his shirt collar. "Oh man, what is that?" he choked out. I had no answer. My fear, which had been a low hum, was now a screaming siren in my head. Every instinct was telling me we were in danger. Serious danger. We both stood up. The fire crackled between us, suddenly feeling very small and inadequate. And that's when we heard the footstep. It was just one. A single heavy step that snapped a dry twig. It came from the darkness just to the left of our tent, maybe 30 feet away. It was heavy. Too heavy for a person. Way too heavy for a coyote. It was the kind of weight that presses deep into the earth. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I reached into my pack and pulled out my mag light. It was a big, heavy one. Chris grabbed his own smaller tactical flashlight. "On 3, I whispered, my voice shaking. "Aim for the sound." He just nodded, his eyes wide. 1, 2, 3. We both hit our lights at the same time, sweeping the beams toward the spot where we heard the sound. At first, I saw nothing, just the dense undergrowth and the trunks of trees. Then my beam caught something. 2 points of light. Eye shine. But it was wrong. I've seen the eye shine of deer, raccoons, coyotes, even bears. Their eyes are low to the ground. These were high, easily 7, maybe 8 feet off the ground. They were a strange color, too. Not the green or white I was used to. They were a deep, glowing amber, like hot coals. And they weren't just reflecting the light. They seemed to have their own internal luminescence. "Mark," Chris breathed. His voice was trembling. "What is that?" I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to fit it into a box, a person on stilts, an owl in a low branch. None of it made sense. I held my light steady on the eyes. My hand was shaking so badly the beam was vibrating. For a long moment, nothing happened. The eyes just stared back at us, unblinking. Then it moved. It took one step forward, out of the deepest shadows and into the edge of the light. And my world broke. My understanding of reality, of the natural world, it just shattered into a million pieces. It was standing on two legs. Two long, powerfully muscled legs that were bent backwards at the knee, like a dog's. It was covered in coarse, dark fur, almost black. It was massive, broad, impossibly broad shoulders, long arms with clawed hands hanging at its sides. But the head was what broke me. It was a wolf's head, a long snout filled with yellowed teeth that I could see even from that distance, pointed ears that twitched, listening, and those eyes, those intelligent, malevolent amber eyes. They were staring right at us. It was not an animal. An animal looks at you with instinct, curiosity, or fear, or hunger. This thing, it looked at us with intelligence, with calculation, with hatred. Time seemed to stop. My brain refused to work. It was a slideshow of impossible images. Canine head, humanoid body, digitigrade legs, claws, eyes filled with malice. I heard Chris make a small, choked sound next to me, like he was trying to scream but had no air. The creature lowered its head slightly, and it let out a sound. It wasn't a growl. It was deeper than that. It was a low, rumbling vibration that we felt in the ground and in our chests. It was a sound of pure, absolute menace, a warning, a promise of violence. That sound snapped me out of my paralysis. The survival instinct, buried under layers of modern life, roared to the surface. There was no fighting this thing. There was no reasoning with it. There was only one option: run. "Truck!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Get to the truck!" I didn't wait to see if Chris was following. I just turned and ran. I abandoned everything: the tent, our packs, the food, the fire. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the 50 yards of dark forest between us and the truck. I heard Chris scrambling right behind me, and behind him I heard a sound that will haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. An explosive guttural snarl, followed by the sound of something immense crashing through the woods. It was coming after us, and it was fast, impossibly fast. I've never run like that in my life. It was pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. My lungs burned, my legs pumped like pistons. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I didn't feel them. All I could hear was the crashing and snarling behind me getting closer. I could hear its heavy footfalls pounding the earth. I could hear its ragged, hot breath. I could smell that god-awful stench thick in the air. It was right behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was a mistake. In the faint, dying light of the fire, I saw it. It was running on two legs, but hunched over, its long arms swinging. It was covering the ground in huge, loping strides. Its amber eyes were locked on us. I screamed. I didn't even know I was screaming. I saw the dark shape of the truck ahead. 20 yards, 10 yards. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys, my fingers numb and useless. I got them out, jamming the key fob, hitting the unlock button. The truck's lights flashed, and the locks clicked open. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open. "Chris, get in!" I yelled. He practically dove over me, scrambling into the passenger seat. I threw myself in behind him, pulling the heavy door shut. I slammed it closed just as a massive heavy body slammed into the side of the truck. The whole vehicle rocked on its suspension. A deep, terrifying dent appeared in the driver's side door right next to my head. A split second later, and that would have been me. A hand, a clawed, massive hand, scraped down the window. The sound of claws on glass was like nails on a chalkboard, amplified 1,000 times. I screamed again, scrambling away from the window, pressing myself against Chris. We were both screaming, just pure, mindless terror. I fumbled for the lock button and slammed it down. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I could barely do it. The engine turned over, roared to life. I flicked on the headlights. The beam illuminated the trees in front of us. Nothing. But we could hear it. It was circling the truck. Heavy, pacing footsteps. Deep, guttural sniffs at the door seams. The windows. A low, continuous growl that was part rage, part frustration. Chris was sobbing next to me, muttering, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." I was just frozen, staring into the darkness, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then a face appeared at my window. It was so close. The long canine snout pressed against the glass fogged with its hot, foul breath. A black nose and wet, wrinkled lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing those long, yellow fangs. And the eyes, those amber eyes, they stared right into mine. And I saw it again, not an animal. This was a monster. It knew we were in here. It was looking at me. It was trying to figure out how to get to me. I was looking into the face of my own death. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, an eternity. It just stared at me, its eyes burning with a cold, ancient hatred. Then it pulled its head back. It let out one last deafening roar, a sound of pure fury that shook the entire truck. Then it was gone. We heard it crash back into the woods, the sound of its retreat fading into the distance. And then silence. The same heavy, oppressive silence from before. We didn't move. We sat there in the dark cab of the truck, panting, sweating, crying. The engine idled. The headlights cut a path into an empty forest. We didn't talk. What was there to say? We waited. We waited for what felt like a lifetime. Every tiny sound from the woods made us jump. But it didn't come back. We stayed in that truck until the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the trees. Only then did I feel safe enough to put the truck in drive. I didn't even think about our gear. The tent, the packs, everything. It could all rot there for all I cared. I drove out of there like the devil himself was on my heels. I didn't slow down until we hit paved roads. The entire drive home, we barely spoke. Chris just stared out the window, his face pale and drawn. When I dropped him off at his house, he got out of the truck, and without looking at me, he said, "We're never talking about this again. Not to anyone, not to each other. It didn't happen." And then he walked inside, and he's kept his word. It's been 4 years. Our annual camping trip tradition is dead. We barely speak. When we see each other at family holidays, there's a chasm between us, an unspoken thing that he refuses to acknowledge. It broke something between us. Or maybe what we saw broke something inside him. I got the truck repaired. The guy at the body shop asked me what hit me. A deer? I just nodded and said, yeah, a big one. What else could I say? I don't go in the woods anymore. I used to love it. It was my church. Now I can't even look at a tree line without feeling a knot of fear in my stomach. I installed motion sensor floodlights all around my house. I check the locks 3 times before I go to bed. I can't sleep in total darkness. My wife says I've changed. She's right. You don't see something like that and stay the same. You don't get hunted by something that shouldn't exist and just go back to your normal life. I know what I saw. I'm an experienced outdoorsman. I know what a bear looks like. I know what a dog looks like. This was neither. This was something else, something ancient and evil and very, very real. I'm not writing this to convince anyone. Believe me or don't, it makes no difference. I'm writing this to get it out, to put it somewhere other than the inside of my own head. And maybe as a warning to anyone else who thinks the woods are just a quiet, peaceful place. They are, until they're not. You are not always at the top of the food chain. Remember that. My name is withheld, but you can call me Sarah. I'm in my late 50s now. My husband, Tom, and I had always dreamed of moving out of the city. We wanted peace and quiet. We wanted space. We wanted to see the stars at night without the glow of streetlights. 5 years ago, we finally did it. We bought a beautiful old farmhouse on 20 acres in rural Iowa. It needed some work, but it was our dream. The house sat on a small rise, surrounded by a few old oak trees. The rest of the property was mostly open pasture, except for one side. The entire north side of our property bordered a massive cornfield, hundreds of acres of it. It belonged to a large agricultural company, not a local farmer. We never even saw who planted or harvested it. In the spring and early summer, it was just a green expanse. But by late August, it was a dense wall of green stalks, towering over 8 feet tall. It was beautiful in its own way, especially at sunset, when the light would catch the tassels. I loved that house. I loved the quiet. Tom worked as a regional manager, so he often had to work late or travel for a day or two. I was alone in the house quite a bit, but it never bothered me. I felt safe. What was there to be afraid of? Our nearest neighbor was a mile down the road. The only sounds at night were the crickets and the wind in the corn. It was idyllic. The first time it happened was on a Tuesday night in September. The corn was at its peak height and starting to dry out. Tom was at a dinner meeting in the city about an hour away. He wasn't expected home until late. I was in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. The kitchen window looks directly out over the back lawn towards the edge of the cornfield, which was maybe 100 yards away. The sun had set, and it was that time of evening, dusk, where everything is bathed in a soft, gray light. As I was rinsing a plate, movement at the edge of the corn caught my eye. I didn't think much of it at first. We saw deer all the time. I paused and watched, expecting to see a doe and her fawn step out to graze, but nothing stepped out. The movement was just there, at the very edge of the stalks. It wasn't the swaying of the corn in the wind. This was a deliberate movement, a dark shape, pacing back and forth, just inside the first row of corn. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was tall. The corn was easily 8 feet tall, and the top of this shape was visible above it. That wasn't right for a deer. A person? Who would be walking in the cornfield at dusk? A shiver went down my spine. It was a sudden, cold feeling of dread, the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. I turned off the kitchen light so my reflection wouldn't be in the window. I stood in the dark, watching. The shape continued to pace back and forth, back and forth, a steady, relentless rhythm. It was too dark to make out any details. It was just a silhouette, a tall, broad silhouette against the slightly lighter stalks of corn. My heart started to beat faster. This wasn't right. I remembered we kept a pair of binoculars in the junk drawer in the living room. I backed away from the window slowly, as if it could see me. I fumbled in the drawer, my hands shaking slightly. I found the binoculars and went back to the kitchen window. I raised them to my eyes, my hands trembling so much it was hard to focus. I found the spot. The image swam into view, and I wished it hadn't. It had stopped pacing. It was standing still, partially turned towards the house. It was a creature from a nightmare. It was standing on two legs. That much was clear. It was tall and powerfully built, especially in the shoulders and chest. Its arms were long, unnaturally long, hanging down almost to its knees. It was covered in dark, shaggy fur or hair. But the head, oh God, the head. It was the head of a gigantic wolf or a dog, a long snout, pointed ears that stood erect on top of its head. Even in the fading light, I could see the shape of it clearly. It was just standing there, and it was looking right at my house. I dropped the binoculars. They hit the linoleum floor with a clatter. I clapped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. My legs gave out, and I slid down the kitchen cabinets to the floor. My mind was just a loop of no, 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 no. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was tired. It was a trick of the light. My mind was playing tricks on me. I stayed on the floor for what felt like 10 minutes, my whole body shaking. I finally forced myself to my feet. I had to look again. I had to prove to myself that I was wrong. I crawled to the window and peeked over the sill. It was gone. The edge of the cornfield was still and empty. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me sick. It was my imagination. It had to be. I took a deep, shaky breath and stood up. I immediately went around the house and checked every single lock on every window and door. Then I did it again. I pulled all the curtains and blinds closed. I felt like a child, afraid of the monster under the bed. I was embarrassed, but I couldn't help it. I called Tom. My voice was trembling so much I could barely speak. I tried to tell him what I saw. He was patient, but dismissive. "Honey, you're just tired. It was probably a shadow from the trees. You know how the light gets weird out there at dusk." "No, Tom, this was different. It was a thing. It was huge. It was a deer, Sarah, or your imagination, getting the best of you in that big old house." I could hear the smile in his voice. He wasn't taking me seriously. "Just lock the doors, turn on some lights, and I'll be home in a little while, okay? I love you." I hung up the phone, feeling more alone than ever. He didn't believe me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just being foolish. I tried to busy myself. I turned on the TV, but I couldn't focus on it. Every little creak of the old house made me jump. After about an hour, I couldn't stand it any more. The not knowing. I had to look outside again. I went to the living room window, the one that faced the front yard. I pulled the edge of the curtain back just a fraction of an inch and peered out. My heart stopped. It was in the yard. It wasn't in the cornfield anymore. It had moved. It was standing in the middle of our back lawn, halfway between the cornfield and the house. It was just standing there, motionless, a tall, dark statue of pure horror, silhouetted by the faint moonlight. It was closer now, so much closer. I could see its shape more clearly. The broad shoulders, the wolf-like head, pointed towards the house. It knew I was here. It was watching, waiting. I let the curtain fall and backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't my imagination. This was real, and it was outside my house. Panic, true, mind-numbing panic, set in. I ran through the house, turning off all the lights. My thinking was, if it can't see me, maybe it will go away. I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen block. It felt pathetic and useless in my hand. I ran upstairs and locked myself in our master bathroom. It was the only room in the house with no windows. I sat on the floor in the dark with my back against the door, holding the knife. And I listened. For a long time, there was nothing, just the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. Then I heard it, a soft, scraping sound. It was coming from the back of the house. It was the sound of something dragging along the wood siding. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was walking around the house, slowly, deliberately. I held my breath, listening. The scraping stopped at the back door, the one in the kitchen. I heard a soft sniffing sound, a deep, wet inhale. It was smelling the door. Then a soft thump against the door. Then another. It was testing it. I was going to die. That thought was so clear in my mind. This thing was going to break down the door, and it was going to find me, and I was going to die in this dark bathroom. I started to pray. I just sat there on the cold tile, crying silently, praying for it to go away, praying for Tom to come home. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I heard more scraping, more sniffing at the windows. It circled the house 2 or 3 times. It was patient. Then I heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Tom was home. Headlights swept across the front of the house, and then the big motion sensor floodlights on the garage flashed on, bathing the entire property in brilliant white light. I heard the car door shut. I heard Tom whistling as he walked to the front door. I scrambled out of the bathroom and ran down the stairs, flipping on every light switch as I went. When he walked in the front door, he found me at the bottom of the stairs, hysterical. I was a sobbing, incoherent mess. He was shocked. He held me, trying to calm me down, asking what was wrong. "It's outside. It's still out there," I cried. He sat me down on the couch and went to the back door. He unlocked it and stepped outside. "Sarah, there's nothing out here," he called. I ran to the door and looked. The yard was empty. The floodlights illuminated every corner. There was nothing there. No creature, no tracks in the soft grass, nothing. It was just gone. Tom was convinced I'd had a panic attack, a waking nightmare brought on by stress and being alone in the house. He searched the whole property. He found nothing. No broken branches, no footprints, nothing. He told me I had imagined the whole thing, and he never wavered from that. That was almost worse than the creature itself. The person I loved and trusted most in the world thought I was losing my mind. It created a distance between us that has never fully healed. I could never be in that house alone again. If Tom had to work late, I'd go stay in a hotel in the city. If he traveled, I'd go stay with my sister. I became a prisoner in my own dream home. I would find myself just staring out the window at the cornfield, my heart pounding. Was it still out there, watching, waiting for me to be alone again? We sold the house a year later. We lost a lot of money on it, but I didn't care. I just had to get away. We live in a suburban neighborhood now, with close neighbors and streetlights. I still have nightmares. I still see that long canine face, those pointed ears against the sky. Tom and I are still together, but things are different. He treats me like I'm fragile, like I might break at any moment. He still thinks I imagined it all, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a panic attack. There is something living in the cornfields of Iowa, something tall and dark and intelligent, and it watches people. I don't know what it wanted, but I know that if Tom hadn't come home when he did, I would have found out, and I don't think I would have survived it. My name's Jake. I've been a long-haul trucker for about 10 years. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, especially at night. Sleep deprivation can do weird things to your mind. You see shadows move. You think a mailbox is a person for a split second. I know the difference between being tired and seeing something that's really there. What I saw 3 years ago, that was real. I was on a regular run, hauling paper products from Wisconsin down to Illinois. It was a route I'd done dozens, maybe hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every little town, every lonely stretch of highway. The part of the trip I'm talking about is in northern Wisconsin. It's a long, dark stretch of two-lane state highway. It cuts right through a massive national forest. For about 50 miles, there's nothing. No houses, no gas stations, no lights. Just you, the road, and millions of trees pressing in on both sides. It was late, probably around 2 in the morning. The air was clear and cold. I was wide awake, drinking a coffee, listening to a late-night talk radio show. I was making good time. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. My headlights were cutting a tunnel through the absolute blackness. The trees were so thick, it was like driving through a canyon of darkness. I was doing about 60, maybe 65 miles an hour. The speed limit was 55, but everyone pushes it on that stretch. Up ahead, in the far reach of my high beams, something burst out of the woods on the right side of the road. My first immediate thought was deer. It's the biggest danger on these roads at night. I've seen what a deer can do to a car and even to a big rig. My foot instinctively went for the brake. I braced myself for the sickening thud of impact, but it didn't move like a deer. Deer are graceful, but they're clumsy when they panic. They leap and bound. This thing, it ran. It came out of the trees on two legs, moving with a terrifying speed and purpose. My brain just short-circuited for a second. The image didn't compute. It was happening so fast. It was in the middle of my lane and then crossing the center line, all in the space of a heartbeat. My headlights hit it dead on for just a second. One single perfect, horrifying second. It was huge, taller than a man. I was sitting up high in my cab, and its head was almost level with my line of sight. It was covered in thick, matted, dark brown fur. It was lean, but powerfully built. You could see the muscles moving under the fur. It was running, hunched forward slightly, its long arms pumping. As it crossed the yellow lines, it turned its head and looked directly at my truck, at me. Its face is burned into my memory like a brand. It was the face of a wolf, a long, graying snout, lips pulled back just enough to show a flash of long, yellow teeth, and its eyes. They caught the headlights and glowed with a brilliant, hellish yellow light. It wasn't the passive reflection of a deer's eyes. This was like two yellow lasers cutting through the dark. There was intelligence in that look, and anger, pure, undiluted rage. It took 3 long, loping strides to cross the entire 2-lane highway. 3 steps, and then it was gone. It didn't crash into the trees on the left side. It just disappeared into them, as if the forest swallowed it whole. I was still standing on the brakes. The truck skidded, the trailer fishtailing slightly. The air brakes hissed as I came to a shuddering stop in the middle of the empty highway. Silence. The radio host was still talking, but I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. "What the hell was that?" I said out loud to the empty cab. My hands were shaking. I was breathing like I'd just run a marathon. Bear? No. Bears don't run on 2 legs like that. They don't have wolf heads. A person in a suit? Out here? At 2 in the morning? Moving that fast? No, absolutely not. I sat there for maybe a full minute, just trying to get my breathing under control. I had to keep going. I couldn't just sit here in the middle of nowhere. I put the truck in gear and slowly started moving again. I kept my eyes glued to the woods on the left, where it had disappeared. I saw nothing. I started to pick up speed. 50, 55, 60. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light. A weird-looking bear that was up on its hind legs for a second. My tired mind playing tricks. But I knew. Deep down in that primal part of my brain, I knew what I had seen was real. I glanced at my driver's side mirror. Just a nervous habit. And my blood ran cold. There was movement in the mirror, a dark shape, keeping pace with me. It had come back out of the woods. It was running in the ditch on the side of the road, just off the shoulder. It was running alongside my truck. I was doing 60 miles an hour, 60, and this thing was keeping pace with me, effortlessly. It was loping along, its powerful legs eating up the ground. It was running through tall grass and uneven terrain and brush, and it was moving as fast as my semi-truck on a paved road. It was impossible. My logical mind screamed that it was impossible. But my eyes were telling me it was happening. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The engine groaned as I pushed it. 65, 70. The creature was still there. It was a dark blur in my mirror, but it was there. It started to gain on me. It was pulling up alongside my cab. I could see it more clearly now in my peripheral vision. It was just a few feet away from my door. I could see its massive form, the fur on its back bristling. I could see its head turned towards me. I could see the glint of its yellow eyes. I floored it. My foot was pressed all the way to the floor. The speedometer needle climbed. 75, 80. The truck was vibrating, straining. The creature was still there. It was right outside my window. I was terrified to look, but I couldn't look away. It was so close I could have reached out and touched it. It opened its mouth, and it let out a sound. Even over the roar of my diesel engine and the wind rushing past, I heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong on this earth. It was a horrifying mix of a deep, chest-rattling bark and a high-pitched, human-like scream. A sound of pure, psychopathic rage. It wanted me. It was trying to get to me. I don't know if it was going to try to jump on the truck or break the window or what. I didn't want to find out. I swerved the truck to the right, toward the center of the road. Maybe I thought I could hit it. I don't know. It was pure instinct. The creature didn't even flinch. It just kept running. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was over. It veered away from the truck, cutting sharply back into the darkness of the trees. 1 second it was there, a terrifying presence of fur and teeth and rage right beside me. The next, it was gone. I kept the accelerator pinned to the floor. I didn't slow down for another 20 miles. My eyes were darting back and forth between the road ahead and my side mirror. But it was gone. The first sign of civilization I saw was a brightly lit 24-hour truck stop. I've never been so happy to see neon lights in my life. I pulled in, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I shut off the engine and just sat there in the sudden silence. My shirt was soaked with sweat. It took me a few minutes to get the courage to get out of the cab. My legs felt like jelly. I almost fell down the steps. I needed to see. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. I walked along the driver's side of my truck, running my hand along the trailer. And then I found them. Starting from about halfway down the trailer and going all the way up to my cab door, there were long, deep scratches in the paint. There were 4 of them, running parallel to each other. They were deep, down to the bare metal in some spots. They were the marks of claws, gigantic claws. I just stood there staring at them. Proof. I wasn't crazy. It was real. I went inside the truck stop and drank about 5 cups of coffee. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat in a booth until the sun came up. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? The police? My dispatcher? Yeah, hi. A werewolf ran alongside my truck and scratched it up. They would have sent me for a drug test and a psychological evaluation. When I got back to the depot, I told my boss I must have scraped a tree branch without realizing it. He just grunted and told me to be more careful. I put in a request for a different route the next day. I told them I was just tired of the same old drive. I have not driven that stretch of highway in northern Wisconsin since, and I never will again, especially not at night. I still drive truck for a living, but something has changed. The darkness doesn't feel empty anymore. When I'm on those long, lonely stretches of road at night, I feel like I'm being watched. I see that face in my headlights sometimes when I close my eyes. The long snout, the glowing yellow eyes full of hate. I saw something that science and logic say can't possibly exist, but it does. It's out there in the dark places of the world, and it is faster than you can imagine. I was lucky. I was in a 2-ton truck. I often wonder what would have happened if I had been in a car, or worse, if my truck had broken down on that lonely stretch of road. It's a thought I try not to have. My name is David. I'm 46 years old. This isn't a recent story. This happened a long time ago, in the summer of 1988. I was 12 years old, but it's as clear in my mind today as it was the night it happened. Maybe clearer, because I've had 34 years to turn it over and over in my head. Every summer, my cousin Kevin and I would be sent to stay with our grandpa for a few weeks. Kevin was my age, just a few months older. We were more like brothers than cousins. Grandpa had a small farm in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. It wasn't a working farm anymore. He was retired. It was just a few acres of cleared land with an old farmhouse, a barn, and a chicken coop. The property backed right up against a huge expanse of national forest. To two 12-year-old boys, it was paradise. We had total freedom. From sunup to sundown, we were outside. We explored the woods, built forts, dammed up the creek, fished for crawdads. The woods were our kingdom. We knew every path, every tree, every rock. We felt like we belonged there. We weren't afraid of anything. We'd seen black bears from a distance. We knew about the copperheads and rattlesnakes. Our grandpa had taught us to be smart, to be aware. But we weren't scared. It was our backyard. The day it happened had been a normal summer day, hot and humid. We had spent the afternoon down at the creek, which was about a half-mile into the woods behind the house. We were skipping rocks and trying to catch minnows in a jar. We lost track of time, like kids do. We didn't realize how late it was getting until the light started to fail. The sun had dropped behind the mountains, and the woods were getting dim. Grandpa had a rule: be back at the house by the time the porch light comes on. We knew we were pushing it. We started heading back, taking the familiar path along the creek. We were laughing and talking, arguing about who skipped a rock the farthest. As we got closer to the edge of the woods, where the trees opened up into Grandpa's backfield, the feeling changed. It was sudden. 1 minute we were just two kids walking home. The next, everything felt wrong. The first thing we noticed was the silence. The woods in summer are never silent. There's always the buzz of insects, the chirping of birds getting ready to roost, the rustle of squirrels. But all of that was gone. It was a dead, flat quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. Kevin stopped walking. He grabbed my arm. "Dave, do you feel that?" he whispered. His voice was shaky. I nodded. I felt it too, a cold, prickly feeling on my skin. It felt like we had walked into a bubble where the air was different. It felt like we were being watched intensely. We both stood frozen, scanning the trees around us. The woods were dark now, full of deep shadows. Every tree looked like a lurking figure. Then we heard a sound. It came from a thicket of rhododendron just off the path, maybe 40 feet ahead of us. It was a low, huffing sound, like a very large animal breathing, slowly and deeply. Huff, huff, huff. "Bear," I mouthed, not daring to make a sound. We knew what to do if we encountered a bear. Make yourself look big, make a lot of noise, and back away slowly. We started to back up, step by silent step. We didn't take our eyes off the thicket. The huffing sound stopped, and then it stood up. It wasn't a bear getting on its hind legs. A bear is clumsy when it does that. This was fluid, effortless. It had been crouched down in the bushes, and it just rose. It rose up and up and up. It was silhouetted perfectly against the last pale glow of the sky through the trees. It was taller than any man I had ever seen. It was huge, impossibly broad at the shoulders with a narrow waist, long, muscular arms. But it was the shape of its head and neck that made my 12-year-old brain crash. It wasn't human. It was the unmistakable shape of a canine head, a long snout, tall, pointed ears that stood up straight. It was the monster from a fairy tale, the big, bad wolf come to life. And it was standing right there, on our path. Neither of us screamed. We couldn't. The air was gone from my lungs. I was paralyzed. My feet were rooted to the spot. All I could do was stare at this impossible silhouette. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, perfectly still, watching us. Its stillness was the most terrifying part. It wasn't acting like an animal. An animal would be curious or aggressive or scared. This thing was just observing. It felt ancient. It felt like it had all the time in the world. And we had none. I could feel a coldness spreading through my chest, a deep, primal terror that I had never known existed. This wasn't just a predator. This was wrong. With a capital W. It was something that shouldn't be. I heard a small, hiccuping sound next to me. It was Kevin. He had started to cry, quietly. Tears were just streaming down his face. The tiny sound seemed to break the spell. The creature's head tilted slightly, as if in curiosity. That little movement was all it took. My survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed Kevin's arm. My hand was slick with sweat. "Run!" I choked out. It was barely a whisper. We turned and we ran. We didn't look back. We just bolted, blindly, through the darkening woods. We ran off the path, crashing through bushes, stumbling over roots. We didn't hear it chase us. There was no sound of pursuit, no crashing footsteps, no growls, just that awful, heavy silence. But I could feel its eyes on my back the entire way. I know Kevin could too. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. We saw the yellow glow of Grandpa's porch light through the trees. It was like a beacon of safety in a world that had suddenly become a nightmare. We burst out of the woods and sprinted across the field. We didn't stop running until we were on the back porch, throwing open the kitchen door and tumbling inside. We were both sobbing, hysterical. We couldn't form words. We just pointed at the woods, gasping for breath. Grandma came running. She tried to calm us down, to get us to tell her what was wrong. Grandpa came in from the living room. He was a man of few words, a hard, no-nonsense mountain man. He took one look at our faces, at the pure terror in our eyes, and he went and got his .30-06 rifle from the cabinet. He didn't ask us what we saw. He just said, "Stay with your grandma." He took his 2 coonhounds, Old Blue and Red, and a powerful flashlight, and went out the back door. We watched from the kitchen window. We saw him get to the edge of the field where the woods began. The dogs, normally fearless and eager to go into the woods, stopped dead. They started whining, their tails tucked between their legs. Old Blue even lay down and refused to move. Grandpa tried to urge them forward, but they wouldn't go. They were terrified of something in those trees. He stood there for a long time, shining his light into the darkness. Eventually, he came back to the house. The dogs were still cowering at his heels. He came inside and put the rifle away. He looked at Kevin and me. "You boys probably just saw a big buck or a bear in the twilight," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "Get your imagination running wild. Now stop this foolishness." But I saw his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my grandpa's eyes. He knew we hadn't seen a bear. He knew his dogs better than anyone. He knew something was wrong, but he would never, ever admit it. It was easier to pretend we were just scared kids. That night, Kevin and I slept in the same bed. We didn't talk about it. We just lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house. The next day, something had changed. The woods were no longer our kingdom. They were a place of fear. We didn't go back in them for the rest of our stay. We stayed in the yard, close to the house, and something had changed between me and Kevin. That shared terror should have bonded us for life. Instead, it built a wall between us. When we went home, we never spoke of it again. The next summer, when our parents talked about sending us to Grandpa's, Kevin refused to go. He threw a fit. He never went back. Over the years, we drifted apart. We'd see each other at Christmas or Thanksgiving. But it was always awkward. There was always this huge, unspoken thing between us. A few years ago, at a family funeral, I finally tried to talk to him about it. We were adults then, in our 40s. I pulled him aside and said, "Kevin, do you ever think about what we saw in the woods at Grandpa's?" He just looked at me with a blank expression. "What are you talking about?" he said. "We were kids. We probably saw a deer and scared ourselves. We had overactive imaginations." He was denying it, completely and totally. I looked him in the eyes and I said, "No, that's not what happened. We saw something. You know we did." He got angry. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," he said, and he walked away, and that was it. He chose to forget. He chose to believe the lie our grandpa told us because the truth was too monstrous to live with. I think that's what bothers me the most. Not the creature itself, but the fact that something so real, so terrifying, can be erased from someone's memory. It makes me feel crazy sometimes. It makes me question my own mind. But I know what I saw. I know what we both saw. We saw a monster in the woods. It was real. And seeing it, for that one brief moment, it changed the course of my life, and it destroyed the closest friendship I ever had. Childhood is supposed to be a time of magic, but sometimes the magic is dark, and it leaves scars that never truly fade. And with that, we have come to the end of our time together for this evening. I want to extend a genuine, heartfelt thank you to the people who trusted me with their experiences. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and David. Thank you for your courage in writing these down and sharing them. I know it isn't easy to revisit these moments, and I, along with everyone listening, deeply appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who took the time to listen, to sit in the dark with us for a while and hear these accounts. If these stories resonate with you, if they've made you think, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who you think might appreciate it. And if you haven't already, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. It truly helps more than you know. I also want to say that I do read the comments. I see the conversations that happen there, the support that you all show to the storytellers and to each other. It's a remarkable community, and I'm grateful for the respectful and thoughtful way you all engage with this difficult subject matter. Please continue to be kind to one another. Until we meet again, my friends, I want you to take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Watch over your loved ones and be good to them. Keep your head on a swivel. Stay safe out there. And as always, good night. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're all doing well out there, no matter where you are, no matter what time it may be. We have a few stories for you tonight. As always, these are sent in by listeners. These are from regular people, living regular lives, until something happens that has no clean explanation. I'm not here to push any conclusions on you. I'm just here to share the experiences as they were shared with me. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to send in, the email address is in the description below. I read every single one. Now, for all you legends, lock in and let's begin. My name is not important. What happened is, I'm writing this because it's been nearly 15 years and I've only ever told two people. One was my wife, and she believes me, but she doesn't understand. The other was my cousin, who was there, and he refuses to speak a single word about it. Not one. So maybe, just maybe, putting it down like this will help. Or maybe it'll just serve as a warning. I was 22 at the time. My cousin, Mark, was 20. We were inseparable back then. We grew up together in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows your truck and your dog's name. Our playground was the thousands of acres of state game lands that surrounded us. We knew those woods like the back of our hands. We hunted, we fished, we camped. We were never scared of them. They were home. That summer, we were obsessed with fishing this one particular spot on the creek. It was a good mile-and-a-half walk from the nearest dirt access road. You had to park, hike through some thick woods, and follow the water until it made a sharp, deep bend. The water there was slow and dark, and it held some of the biggest trout in the county. Because it was so hard to get to, we were always alone. That was part of the appeal. It was a Thursday in late July. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of humid that sticks to your skin. A thunderstorm had rolled through in the afternoon, so the ground was soft and damp. The wood smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. We packed light, just our rods, a small tackle box, and a couple of lukewarm sodas. We didn't plan on being out long, just a few hours to catch the evening bite. We parked my old beat-up Ford Ranger where we always did, on a gravel pull-off, barely big enough for one vehicle. The sun was already starting to dip below the ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The light filtering through the dense canopy of the trees was getting that hazy golden quality it gets right before dusk. The walk-in was normal. We joked. We talked about girls, about work, the usual stuff. The birds were chirping, squirrels were chattering, and rustling in the underbrush. Everything was exactly as it should be. We reached the bend and set up on our usual spot, a flat, mossy rock that jutted out over the water. Mark was on my right, about 10 feet away. We fished for an hour, maybe more. The fish weren't biting much, but we didn't care. It was peaceful. The sound of the water burbling over rocks, the buzz of insects, the occasional call of a whippoorwill. It was the soundtrack of our youth. And then it stopped. It wasn't gradual. It was instant, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the volume of the entire forest. The birds went silent. The insects stopped buzzing. Even the frogs, which had been croaking their heads off downriver, went quiet. The only sound left was the water itself. I looked over at Mark. He was looking around, his brow furrowed. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, his eyes wide. He didn't have to ask what I meant. The silence was deafening. It was unnatural. In all our years in those woods, we had never experienced anything like it. A predator moving through can quiet a patch of woods. Sure, a deer, a bear, a coyote. But this was different. This was a total, all-encompassing silence that felt heavy. It felt wrong. My heart started to beat a little faster. The feeling of peace was gone, replaced by a low, humming anxiety. It felt like we were being watched, not just watched, but scrutinized, judged. I scanned the trees on our side of the creek, looking for the telltale sign of a bear or maybe another person, even though we knew we were alone. I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. Then the smell hit us. It came on the breeze, a faint whiff at first, then stronger. It was putrid. It was like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead, mixed with the coppery scent of old blood and something else. Something musky and foul that I can't even describe. It was thick enough to taste. I gagged. "What is that?" Mark choked out, covering his nose and mouth with his shirt. I shook my head. "Dead deer, maybe?" I said, but I didn't believe it. A dead animal smells bad, but this was a living, breathing stink. It was active. It was moving. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was coming from the other side of the creek. The bank over there was steep and thick with laurel and hemlock. It was dark, a wall of shadows in the fading light. My eyes were glued to it, trying to pierce the gloom, section section. Something moved. It was just a flicker, a patch of black that was darker than the other shadows. I might have dismissed it as my eyes playing tricks on me, but Mark saw it too. He let out a sharp, quiet gasp. We both stood frozen, staring at that spot. It was about 50 yards away, across the water. The patch of darkness seemed to coalesce, to take on a more solid form. It was big, much bigger than any person. "Is that a bear?" Mark whispered. His voice was trembling. I wanted it to be a bear. I prayed for it to be a bear. We knew how to handle bears. You make noise, you make yourself look big, you back away, slowly. But the shape was wrong. It was too tall, too lean, even hunched over. It didn't have the familiar lumbering profile of a black bear. Then it stood up. It didn't just rear up on its hind legs like a bear does to get a better look. It stood up, like a man. It unfolded from its crouch into a standing posture, and it just kept going up. 6 feet, 7 feet. It had to be over 7 feet tall. It was silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight filtering through the trees on the ridge behind it. And it was not a bear. The body was wrong. It had broad, powerful shoulders, but a narrow waist. The arms were long, too long, hanging down almost to its knees. The legs were bent in a way that wasn't human. They were digitigrade, like a dog's, with the hocks halfway up the leg. And the head! God, the head! It was canine. A long snout, like a wolf or a German shepherd, was clearly defined against the lighter sky. On top of the head were pointed ears that swiveled independently, listening. We couldn't see fur or color or eyes, just the shape, the impossible, terrifying shape of it. It stood there, perfectly still, its head tilted slightly as if it were studying us. The foul smell washed over us in a wave, stronger than ever. My brain just stopped working. It couldn't process what I was seeing. A part of me was screaming that it was impossible, a trick of the light, a waking nightmare. But another part of me, the old, primal part that lives in the back of your skull, knew exactly what it was. It was a predator, and we were the prey. Neither of us moved. We didn't breathe. The world had shrunk to just the three of us on that river bend, the creature, Mark, and me. The silence was still absolute, broken only by the gurgle of the creek between us. It felt like an eternity passed in those few seconds. Then it moved toward the water. It took a step, and then another. It didn't walk like a man. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly terrifying. It reached the edge of the creek and didn't even hesitate. It stepped into the water, which was maybe 3 feet deep in the middle, and started crossing. And it was fast. The water barely seemed to slow it down. It wasn't swimming. It was wading, churning the water with its powerful legs. The sound of it, splashing through the creek, finally broke the spell. "Go!" That's all I said. It wasn't a shout, it was a strangled croak. Mark was already gone. He had dropped his rod and was scrambling up the bank behind us. I did the same. My expensive fishing rod clattered onto the rock, and I didn't give it a second thought. I just turned and ran. We didn't look back. We couldn't. We just ran. We crashed through the underbrush, saplings whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes and skin. We didn't feel it. All we felt was a pure animal terror that I have never known before or since. Behind us, I could hear it. I could hear it coming out of the water on our side of the creek. A heavy splash, and then the sound of it moving through the woods. It was keeping pace with us, heavy, rhythmic footfalls, the cracking of branches, and a sound, a low, guttural breathing sound, a hungry sound. We were in good shape. We knew these woods, but we were running for our lives, in the dark, on uneven ground. I stumbled, caught my foot on a root, and went down hard. The air was knocked out of my lungs. For a second I just lay there, gasping, convinced it was over. I was going to die right there. Mark screamed my name. He had stopped a few yards ahead. I looked back over my shoulder. I couldn't see anything in the gloom, but I could hear it getting closer. The smell was overwhelming. I don't know where the strength came from. I scrambled to my feet and ran harder than I have ever run in my life. Adrenaline surged through me. We weren't trying to be quiet now. We were just two panicked animals fleeing a monster. The 1.5 miles back to the truck felt like 100 miles. Every shadow was the creature. Every sound was it gaining on us. We burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel pull-off. My truck was there. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. Mark was hammering on the passenger side window, screaming, "Hurry! Hurry!" The lock clicked open. We threw ourselves inside, slamming and locking the doors. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The old engine coughed, sputtered, and died. "No, no, no, no," I chanted, my voice cracking. Behind us, at the edge of the woods, something emerged. It was just a tall, dark shape against the slightly less dark trees. It stood there at the very edge of the woods, watching us. I tried the key again. The engine turned over, caught, and roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, not even looking, and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, kicking up rocks, and then they bit. We shot backwards onto the dirt road. I threw it into drive and floored it. We didn't slow down. We flew down that dirt road, fishtailing around corners, the suspension bottoming out. I didn't care if I wrecked the truck. I just had to get away. Neither of us said a word until we hit the paved highway. The blessed, beautiful, solid paved highway with streetlights. Only then did I ease up on the gas. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was drenched in sweat, shaking uncontrollably. I glanced over at Mark. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale as a ghost. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, but he wasn't making a sound. We drove all the way back to my house in silence. We got out of the truck and went inside. My parents were already asleep. We sat in the kitchen under the harsh fluorescent light. I think I tried to say something, but no words came out. Finally, Mark spoke. His voice was a raw whisper. "We don't ever talk about this," he said, not looking at me. "Ever. We didn't see anything. We got spooked by a bear. That's it." I started to argue, to say, "But we did see it. It wasn't a bear." But I looked at his face, the sheer terror in his eyes, and I just nodded. He stood up and walked out the door without another word. I heard his car start and drive away. That was the last time we ever really talked. We saw each other at family gatherings, of course. We'd nod, say hello. But the bond we had was broken that night. He went off to college that fall and never really came back. He lives on the other side of the country now. I tried calling him once, a few years later, to try and talk about it. He hung up on me. The next day, I went back. I had to. I told myself it was to get my fishing rod, but I know that wasn't the real reason. I had to see in the daylight. I had to try and make sense of it. I took a shotgun with me. I parked the truck and walked in. The woods were normal again. Birds were singing. It was just a sunny summer day, but it felt different. It felt tainted. I was terrified the entire way. I got to the bend. My rod was still there on the rock, right where I had dropped it. I picked it up. Then I looked across the creek. There was nothing there, just trees. I made myself cross the water. It was cold, even in the summer heat. I walked up the bank to where we had seen it standing. The ground was soft from the rain, and there were tracks. They were huge, bigger than any dog or coyote track I'd ever seen. They were canine, but they weren't right. They were too long, too deep, and they were spaced apart, like something walking on two legs. I followed them for a few feet as they came down to the water's edge. Then I went back to my side and found where it had come out of the water. More tracks leading into the woods in the direction we had run. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the proof pressed into the mud. It was real. It had all been real. I sold all my fishing gear the next week. I sold my hunting rifle. I haven't been back in those woods since. I used to love the forest, the peace and quiet. Now, when I look at a dark tree line, my stomach clenches. I feel that same old fear, that feeling of being watched by something that hates me. I don't know what we saw that night. People have names for it. Dogman, werewolf. I don't care what you call it. I know that it was intelligent. I know that it was malevolent. And I know that it was hunting us. We were lucky to get away. I think about that a lot. Why did it stop at the edge of the woods? Why didn't it just tear the truck apart? Maybe the engine starting scared it. Maybe it just wanted to scare us, to let us know we were in its territory. I don't have any answers. All I have is the memory, the silence, the smell, the shape of it standing against the sky. So if you're ever out in the woods and the world suddenly goes quiet, don't wait around to find out why. Just get out. Get out as fast as you can. Because some things are real, whether you believe in them or not. And you do not want to meet them. The experience I'm about to share is the reason I no longer live in the countryside. It's the reason I need to sleep with a light on in the hallway. It's the reason my therapist thinks I have an irrational phobia of the dark. I assure you, it is not irrational. This happened 6 years ago. I was 28. My grandmother had passed away and left me her house. It wasn't a mansion or anything, just a small two-story farmhouse on about 50 acres of land in rural Ohio. It was old, built in the early 1900s, with a big wrap-around porch and a rusty tin roof. It was surrounded by cornfields on three sides and a dense patch of woods on the fourth. The nearest neighbor was a mile down a gravel road. I was a writer working from home, and I was tired of the city, the noise, the rent, the people. The idea of living in this quiet, isolated place for free was a dream come true. I could finally get some real work done. I packed up my apartment, my 10-year-old golden retriever, Buddy, and moved in. For the first few months, it was perfect. I loved the peace. I loved the rhythm of country life, waking up to the sunrise, the sound of cicadas at night. Buddy loved it too. He had acres to run around in. He'd spend his days chasing squirrels and his evenings sleeping at my feet while I wrote. It was idyllic. The trouble started in late autumn. The corn in the surrounding fields had been harvested, leaving miles of flat brown stubble. The trees in the woods had lost their leaves, their bare branches looking like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. The world felt more open, more exposed, and colder. It began with Buddy. He had always been a fearless dog. He'd bark at thunderstorms and chase off deer that were twice his size. But he started acting strange. He didn't want to go outside after dark. I'd open the back door to let him out before bed, and he'd just stand there, whining, his tail tucked between his legs. He'd press himself against my leg and refuse to go onto the porch. I thought maybe he'd had a run-in with a coyote or a raccoon. I'd have to put him on a leash and walk him out into the yard, and he'd do his business as fast as he could, constantly looking back toward the dark woods at the edge of the property. Then I started hearing things. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd hear noises from outside, the sound of something heavy walking on the wooden porch, a slow, deliberate tread, not the pitter-patter of a raccoon, not the shuffling of a possum. This was heavy. I told myself it was the old house settling, the wood groaning in the cold. One night I heard scratching, a faint, rhythmic scratching at the back door. I froze at my desk. Buddy, who was lying by the fireplace, shot up. The fur on his back stood on end, and a low, deep growl rumbled in his chest. He stood between me and the door, a silent, trembling guardian. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and crept to the door. I peered through the little peephole. All I could see was darkness. The scratching stopped. I waited, my heart pounding in my ears. After a minute of complete silence, I convinced myself it must have been a branch scraping against the house in the wind. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. Buddy didn't relax for the rest of the night. This went on for a couple of weeks. The nightly walks on the porch, the occasional scratching, Buddy's increasing terror. I started to feel a creeping unease. The isolation that I had craved now felt oppressive. The silence I had loved now felt menacing, like it was holding its breath. I started double-checking the locks on the doors and windows before I went to bed. The night it all came to a head was cold and clear. A full moon hung in the sky, so bright it cast long, sharp shadows across the barren fields. It was just after midnight. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, trying to unwind before heading to bed. Buddy was in the living room, asleep. I was standing at the sink, looking out the window above it. The window looked out over the back porch and the yard, which was bathed in that pale, ghostly moonlight. That's when I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the woods, right where the trees met the yard. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was too tall, and it was standing on two legs. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I just stared, my hand frozen on the kettle. It was tall and impossibly thin, almost skeletal. It was dark, but the moonlight gave it a silvery sheen. It stood perfectly still, and I had the distinct impression that it was looking right at the house, right at me. I told myself it was a trick of the moonlight, a strange shadow, a dead tree stump playing tricks on my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but it was still there, and then it took a step out of the woods and into the yard. The breath caught in my throat. This was not a tree. This was not a shadow. It moved with a slow, loping gait that was both animal and yet horribly human. It was heading for the house. As it got closer into the full moonlight, I could see details, and my mind shattered into a million pieces. It was covered in short, dark fur. Its legs were long and jointed like a dog's, ending in what looked like large paws. Its arms were long and wiry, with hands that had long, dark claws. But the head was what broke me. It was the head of a wolf or a huge, monstrous dog. A long snout, pointed ears that stood erect on its head, and its eyes. I could see them flash in the moonlight. They seemed to glow with their own faint yellow light. It walked across my yard, heading directly for the back porch, as if it owned the place. It moved with a terrifying confidence. This wasn't its first visit. I stumbled backwards, away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was impossible. This couldn't be real. But Buddy started barking, a frantic, terrified barking from the living room. He knew it was there. I ran from the kitchen, my mind racing. Call the police? What would I say? There's a monster in my yard? They'd think I was crazy. The creature was on the porch now. I could hear the heavy thud of its feet on the old wood. Thud, thud, thud. It walked the length of the porch, and then it stopped, right in front of the back door, the same door it had been scratching at. Buddy was going insane, barking and snarling, throwing himself against the door. I grabbed his collar, trying to pull him back, but he was all teeth and fury. Then I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The sound of the doorknob rattling. It was trying to open the door. It was turning the knob, methodically, intelligently. Jiggle, jiggle, turn. The old lock held. Thank God for that old sturdy deadbolt my grandfather had installed. It stopped trying the knob. For a moment there was silence, except for Buddy's frantic barking. Then came the scratching. Not the faint scratching from before. This was loud, vicious, the sound of long, hard claws digging into the thick wood of the door, splintering it. I dragged Buddy away from the door and ran. I didn't know where to go. The house suddenly felt like a flimsy cardboard box. I ran up the stairs, my feet pounding on the steps. I thought about my bedroom, but the windows, they were so big. I felt too exposed. My grandfather had been a hunter. I remembered he kept an old shotgun in the back of the wardrobe in the master bedroom. I ran in there, my hands shaking as I fumbled through his old clothes. I found it, a double-barreled 12-gauge. There was a box of shells next to it. My hands were trembling so much I could barely open the box. I broke the gun open and managed to slide 2 shells into the chambers. I snapped it shut. The click was loud and satisfying in the terrifying silence. The scratching downstairs stopped. It was replaced by a new sound. A heavy, rhythmic thudding against the side of the house. It was circling. It was testing the walls. Thud. Pause. Thud. It sounded like it was hitting the house with its shoulder. The whole house seemed to groan with each impact. I backed away from the window, my shotgun pointed at the door. I was crying, silent tears streaming down my face. Buddy was huddled at my feet, whining, a low, constant sound of pure terror. Then I remembered the cellar. The entrance was a heavy wooden door in the kitchen floor. The cellar itself was small, stone-lined, with no windows. It was the safest place in the house. I had to go back downstairs. I took a deep breath, held the shotgun tight against my shoulder, and crept out of the bedroom. The thudding continued, moving along the living room wall now. I tiptoed down the stairs, each creak of the old wood sending a fresh jolt of fear through me. I got to the bottom of the stairs. The kitchen was just down the short hall. The thudding stopped. Silence. The silence was worse. Where was it? What was it doing? I heard a scraping sound from the living room, the sound of claws on glass. It was at the window, the big picture window that looked out onto the porch. I risked a glance. I peeked around the corner of the hallway, and I saw it. It was standing on the porch, its face pressed right up against the glass of the window, its horrifying canine face. Its yellow eyes were staring into the house, scanning the room. Its breath was fogging up the glass. Its lips were curled back in a silent snarl, revealing rows of long yellow teeth, gums as black as tar. We locked eyes. For a split second, the world froze. I saw intelligence in those eyes. I saw hatred. I saw a bottomless, ancient malevolence. It knew I was there. It saw me. It let out a low growl that vibrated through the floor, and then it drew back its head and slammed it into the window. The glass shuddered, a spider web of cracks appearing, but it held. I didn't wait for it to try again. I bolted into the kitchen, threw the rug off the cellar door, and yanked it open. A wave of cool, musty air came up. Buddy scrambled down the steep wooden steps ahead of me. I followed him, pulling the heavy door shut over my head. I fumbled for the thick wooden bar on the inside and slid it into place. We were plunged into absolute darkness. Above us, I heard the window shatter, the tinkle of falling glass, and then the sound of it inside my house. I could hear its claws clicking on the hardwood floor. It was walking around, sniffing, a heavy, purposeful tread. I sat on the cold, damp stone floor, holding the shotgun, pointing it at the door above me. Buddy was whimpering, pressed so hard against me I could feel his whole body shaking. I held him tight, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay," over and over, as much for me as for him. I don't know how long we stayed down there. It felt like a lifetime. I could hear it moving around upstairs, the sound of things being knocked over, a crash from the living room, the click, click, click of its claws going up the stairs. It was searching for us. I heard it walking around in the bedroom directly above the cellar. I held my breath. Could it smell us? Could it hear my heart, which was trying to beat its way out of my chest? Eventually, the sound stopped. I waited and waited. The sun had to be coming up soon. It had to be. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I heard the sound of the back door, the one with the broken lock, creaking open. Then, nothing. I stayed in that cellar for another hour, maybe two, until I could see thin slivers of daylight creeping through the cracks in the floorboards above. Only then did I dare to move. I slid the bar back and pushed the door open. The house was a wreck. Furniture was overturned. A lamp was shattered on the floor. The living room window was a gaping hole, and there were scratches everywhere, deep, angry gouges in the walls, the furniture, the doors. I didn't stay to clean up. I grabbed my purse, my car keys, and Buddy's leash. I put my dog in the car, went back in just long enough to grab my laptop, and I left. I didn't even lock the door. I drove to the nearest town and checked into a motel. I called a realtor that same day and told her to sell the house and the land. I didn't care what she got for it. I just wanted it gone. I never went back, not even to get my clothes or my grandmother's things. None of it was worth it. I live in an apartment now, on the 5th floor of a building in the middle of a bustling city. I have 3 locks on my door. I have blackout curtains on every window. I can't sleep without the TV on. Buddy passed away a few years ago. Old age, the vet said. But I know he was never the same after that night. He was always scared. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear or a dog or any animal I've ever seen or read about. It was a monster, and it wanted in. I don't know why it chose my house. Maybe it had been watching it for years. Maybe it considered that land its territory. All I know is that I was in its world, and I was not welcome. And I am so lucky to be alive. For 12 years, I worked as a timber cruiser for a private forestry company. My job was to go out into vast tracts of woodland, mostly in the Pacific Northwest, and mark trees for future logging operations. It was a solitary job. I'd spend weeks at a time alone in the deep woods, miles from any paved road, with just my truck, my GPS, and my dog for company. I loved it. I was never afraid of the forest. I respected it, but I wasn't scared of it. Until I was. This happened in a remote section of forest in Washington state, not too far from the Canadian border. It was a massive, rugged area, a mix of old growth and secondary forest, crisscrossed with a maze of overgrown logging roads. I was tasked with surveying a new plot, about 5 square miles of dense wilderness that hadn't been touched in decades. I set up a base camp of sorts, just my truck and a small tent, near the entrance to the main access road. My companion was a German shepherd named Gus, a smart, loyal dog who was more at home in the woods than most people. For the first few days, everything was routine. I'd wake up at dawn, drive my truck as far as I could down the crumbling road, and then go out on foot with Gus, marking trees, taking measurements, making notes. It was on the 3rd day that I found the first oddity. I was deep in a valley, following a creek bed, when I came across a set of tracks in the mud. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and these prints were easily half again as long and much wider. My first thought was a bear, but the shape was wrong. It was clearly a canine print. It had 4 toes and a claw mark for each and a large heel pad. But it was no dog I'd ever seen, not a wolf either. The proportions were just off. What really bothered me, though, was the stride. The prints were in a straight line. one directly in front of the other, with a gate of at least 5 feet between them. This wasn't something walking on 4 legs. This was something walking on 2. Gus noticed them too. He lowered his head, sniffed at the edge of one of the prints, and the fur on his neck went up. He let out a low whine and backed away, looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. It was fear. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was 2 sets of tracks, a wolf or a large coyote, one print landing perfectly on top of another. It seemed unlikely, but it was more believable than the alternative. I took a picture with my phone, more out of curiosity than anything, and moved on, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. Over the next 2 days, the feeling grew. It was the classic sensation of being watched, a prickling on the back of my neck, the feeling that I was not alone. I'd stop and scan the trees, listening, but I'd see nothing, hear nothing. The woods would be silent, too silent. Gus was on edge the entire time. He stayed glued to my leg, constantly scanning the dense forest around us, a low growl perpetually rumbling in his chest. He would barely eat. I told myself I was just getting spooked. Too much time alone. The tracks had put me on edge, and my imagination was running away with me. I tried to ignore it. On the 5th day, my truck wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead. Not just low, but drained, as if I'd left the headlights on for 2 days straight, which I hadn't. I was miles from a paved road, and my satellite phone, my only link to the outside world, wasn't getting a signal. I wasn't panicked, annoyed, but not panicked. I was an experienced outdoorsman. I had a pack with food, water, a compass, and a map. It was about a 15-mile walk to the highway, where I knew I could get a signal or flag someone down. It would be a long, unpleasant hike, but it was manageable. I locked up the truck, shouldered my pack, called Gus to my side, and started walking. It was early afternoon. I figured I could make it to the highway by nightfall if I kept a steady pace. I'd been walking for about an hour when I knew for sure I wasn't alone. I was on the main logging road, a wide strip of dirt and gravel overgrown with weeds. The forest pressed in close on both sides, thick and dark. I heard a sound off to my left, the sharp crack of a heavy branch breaking, not the sound of a deer stepping on a twig. This was a thick branch, broken by something heavy. I stopped. Gus froze, his body rigid, his eyes locked on a spot deep in the trees. His growl was louder now, more serious. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. I stared into the woods, trying to see what he was seeing, and then I saw movement. A flash of dark brown fur moving between the trees. It was big, and it was paralleling us. My heart started to pound. "Bear," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. I unholstered the can of bear spray from my belt. It suddenly felt woefully inadequate. We started walking again, faster this time. The thing in the woods kept pace with us. I could hear it moving, heavy footfalls on the forest floor, the occasional snap of a branch. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It wanted me to know it was there. This went on for what felt like an eternity. Every few minutes, I'd catch a glimpse of it, a dark shape, a flash of movement. It was staying just inside the tree line, using the cover of the forest to shadow me. It never came out into the open. The sun was getting lower in the sky. The shadows were growing long. My steady pace had turned into a near jog. Gus was running right beside me, no longer growling, just whining in terror. I had to know what it was. I had to see it. Against my better judgment, I stopped again. I turned to face the woods, my hand tight on the bear spray. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Get out of here! Go on!" For a moment there was silence. Then, from the trees, I saw it step into a small clearing about 40 yards away. It wasn't a bear. It stood on two legs, leaning slightly against a massive Douglas fir. It was huge, easily 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. It was covered in thick, matted, dark brown fur. Its build was immense, broad, muscular shoulders, a thick chest, and powerful legs that were bent like a dog's. Its arms were long and heavily muscled, ending in hands with what looked like thick black claws. Its head was pure nightmare fuel. It was the head of a giant wolf, with a long, heavy snout and pointed ears that were perked, listening. Its mouth was slightly open, and I could see the glint of huge canine teeth. But the eyes were what held me. They were intelligent, and they were a pale, predatory yellow. They stared at me with an unnerving, calculating coldness. There was no animal curiosity there. There was just a quiet, menacing intelligence. Gus let out a terrified yelp and tried to bolt, but I grabbed his collar. I was frozen to the spot, my mind refusing to accept the reality of what I was seeing. It just stood there, watching me, its head tilted slightly. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening to charge. It was just observing, studying me. And that was almost worse. It felt like a game to it. I started backing away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. I pulled Gus with me. The creature didn't move. It just watched as I backed down the road. After about 50 feet, I turned and ran. I didn't sprint, just a steady, panicked run, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. It was gone from the clearing. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had just wanted to show itself and move on. Then I heard it again, back in the woods, keeping a pace with me. The game wasn't over. I ran harder. The road was starting to slope downhill. I rounded a sharp bend, and my heart nearly stopped. It was standing in the middle of the road, about 100 yards ahead of me. It was just standing there, waiting for me, blocking my path. I skidded to a halt. There was nowhere to go. The forest on either side was too thick, the slopes too steep. I was trapped. It took a step towards me, a slow, deliberate step, then another. It wasn't running. It was walking, closing the distance with an unhurried, terrifying confidence. Gus was going berserk, barking and snarling, trying to lunge forward, but I held him back. What could he do against that thing? I raised the can of bear spray. It felt like a child's toy. 50 yards, 40 yards. I could hear its breathing now, a low, guttural sound. I could smell it, a rank, gamey odor of wet fur and something like spoiled meat. I was about to die. I knew it. My life was going to end on this forgotten logging road, torn apart by something that shouldn't exist. I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. And then I heard another sound, the rumble of an engine. My eyes snapped open. Far down the road, behind the creature, a pair of headlights appeared. A truck. An old beat-up logging truck was bouncing its way up the road towards us. The creature heard it too. It stopped and turned its head, its yellow eyes fixing on the approaching vehicle. For a second it seemed to hesitate, as if deciding what to do. The truck kept coming. The driver must have seen us. He laid on the horn, a long, loud blast that echoed through the valley. The creature looked from the truck back to me. It let out a low, frustrated-sounding growl that vibrated in my chest. And then, in two long, powerful strides, it leaped off the road and disappeared into the trees. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The truck screeched to a halt beside me. The passenger door flew open. The driver was a grizzled old man with a long white beard. His eyes were as wide as dinner plates. "Get in!" he yelled. "Now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I threw Gus into the cab and scrambled in after him, slamming the door shut. "What in God's name was that?" the driver breathed, staring at the spot where the creature had been. "You saw it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You saw it too?" "Saw it," he said, his voice trembling. "Son, it was 8 feet tall and looked like a damn werewolf. Of course I saw it." He stomped on the gas, and we tore down that road, leaving a cloud of dust behind us. He didn't slow down until we hit the highway. He drove me all the way to the nearest town and bought me a cup of coffee at a 24-hour diner. His name was Earl. He'd been hauling timber in these parts for 40 years. He said he'd heard stories, whispers from other loggers and hunters about a big, hairy thing that walked on 2 legs. He'd always dismissed them as tall tales. We reported it to the local sheriff. We both gave our statements. I showed them the picture of the track on my phone. They were polite, but dismissive. They wrote it up as a probable grizzly bear sighting. They said we were probably just spooked and misidentified it in the low light. They didn't believe us. I don't think anyone would. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't go back into those woods. I couldn't be alone out there ever again. I sold my truck and all my gear. I moved to the city. I work an office job now. It's boring, but it's safe. I still talk to Earl sometimes. We call each other every few months. He's the only other person on earth who knows what we saw that day. The only one who believes me without question. He sold his truck and retired a year after it happened. He said the woods didn't feel the same to him anymore either. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know what it wanted. Was it just curious? Was it stalking me as prey? Was it just playing a cruel game with me? I think about its eyes, those intelligent yellow eyes. It knew what it was doing. It was in control the entire time. It let me live. I have to believe that. It could have taken me at any moment, but it let me go. Why? That's the question that keeps me awake at night. There are things in the deep woods that the modern world has forgotten, ancient things, and they are very, very real. I know. I met one. I work in the oil fields. Have for about 15 years now. It's hard work, long hours, but it pays the bills. I've worked all over, from the Dakotas to Louisiana, but for the past few years, I've been stationed on a rig in West Texas. When I say remote, I mean remote. We're out in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, 100 miles from anything you'd call a town. It's just flat, empty scrubland as far as the eye can see, dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes. Our rig is a small one, an island of light and noise in a vast ocean of darkness and silence. At night, the floodlights on the derrick light up about 100-yard circle around the pad. Beyond that, it's just black. A deep, impenetrable black you only get in places with no light pollution. You get used to the isolation. You get used to the weird noises the desert makes at night. Coyotes yipping, the wind whistling through the rig, But a few months back, things started to get strange. It started with the guys on the night shift, the graveyard tour. They started talking about seeing something moving right at the edge of the light. They'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of their eye, but when they turned to look, there was nothing there, just the darkness pressing in. We all brushed it off. It's the desert. It plays tricks on your eyes, especially when you're tired after a 12-hour shift. Probably just a coyote or a javelina. Then small things started going missing. A wrench left on a pump jack, a pair of gloves sitting on a railing. Nothing major, but it was happening consistently. We figured it was just guys being careless. Or maybe someone was playing pranks. The foreman got on us about securing our tools, and we tried to be more careful. But the feeling on the rig at night changed. It felt tense. The usual easy banter between the crew quieted down. Guys were sticking closer together, moving in pairs. Everyone felt it, that low-grade, constant feeling of being watched. Then came the smell. It would come and go with the wind, a heavy, musky, gamey smell, like a kennel that hadn't been cleaned in a year, mixed with something like rotting meat. It was foul. We'd smell it for a few minutes, and then it would be gone. We blamed it on a dead coyote or something getting stuck in one of the wastewater pits. We made excuses for everything. We had to. The alternative was too crazy to consider. My turn came on a Tuesday night. It was about 2 in the morning. The air was still and cool. I was on the ground level, doing a routine check on one of the pumps at the edge of the pad. It was one of the noisier spots, the constant thrum of the motor drowning out most other sounds. I was alone. My partner was up on the rig floor. The pump was about 20 feet from the edge of the lighted area. Beyond it was just that wall of absolute darkness. I was crouched down, checking a pressure gauge, my back to the darkness. I had a weird feeling. The hair on my arms was standing up. I tried to shake it off, just tired, just the desert getting in my head. I finished my check and stood up to head back to the main derrick. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was a scrape, the sound of metal on metal. It came from behind me, from the direction of a large steel storage container that sat right at the fringe of the light. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It was a distinct, deliberate sound. I slowly turned around, and my world just fell apart. Standing there, halfway in the light and halfway in the shadow, was something that shouldn't exist. It was standing next to the container, one of its hands resting on the metal surface. That was the sound I'd heard, its claws scraping the steel. It was tall. The container was 8 feet high, and this thing's head was nearly level with the top of it. It was lean but powerfully built, not bulky but corded with muscle, like a greyhound built for running. It was standing on 2 legs, but they weren't human legs. They were bent backwards, like a dog's, and covered in short, coarse-looking, tan-colored fur, the color of the desert sand. Its arms were long and ended in hands that were almost human-like, but too long, too thin, and tipped with thick, black claws. It was its head, though, that made my brain stutter. It was the head of a canid, a long, tapered snout, tall, pointed ears that were swiveling, taking in the sounds of the rig. Its fur was darker on its head and shoulders, almost black. The floodlights of the rig lit it up, clear as day. This wasn't a silhouette. This wasn't a trick of the light. I could see the texture of its fur. I could see the muscles shifting under its skin as it moved. It was sniffing the air, its head raised, its long snout twitching. It hadn't seen me yet. It was just standing there, a predator surveying its territory. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My boots felt like they were nailed to the gravel pad. My mind was screaming, but my body was completely paralyzed with a fear so absolute it was almost serene. It turned its head slowly, and its eyes swept across the rig, and then they landed on me. The eyes were yellow, a pale, glowing yellow, like a wolf's, but filled with a terrifying, cold intelligence. They locked onto mine. There was a moment of absolute stillness, a moment of recognition. It didn't run. It didn't seem startled or afraid. It just looked at me. It knew I was there. And it wasn't scared of me at all. Its lips, which were black and thin, slowly curled back from its teeth. And I saw them. Long, yellowed fangs. Fangs like daggers. A low growl started deep in its chest, a sound that I felt more than heard. It was a sound of pure menace. And then it took a step towards me. That broke the paralysis. The survival instinct kicked in, a jolt of pure adrenaline that was like being struck by lightning. I didn't think. I just reacted. I let out a scream, a pathetic, high-pitched sound, and I turned and ran. I scrambled for the nearest ladder, the one that went up to the rig floor, about 30 feet above. My hands were clumsy, my feet slipping on the rungs. I just kept climbing, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me. Not running, just a heavy, purposeful footstep on the gravel. It wasn't chasing me. It was walking. It knew it didn't have to hurry. I hauled myself over the railing onto the rig floor, gasping for breath. My partner, a guy named Dave, ran over to me. "What's wrong? What happened?" He yelled over the noise of the machinery. I couldn't speak. I just pointed down, my hand shaking violently. Dave and two other guys who were nearby rushed to the railing and looked down. I made myself look too. It was standing directly below us, in the middle of the brightly lit pad. It had its head tilted back, looking right up at us, at me. Its yellow eyes were shining in the glare of the floodlights. It stood there for a long 10 seconds, just staring, letting us get a good, long look. It was showing itself. It was making a statement. Then, as calmly as it had appeared, it turned. It walked to the edge of the light, its long, loping strides eating up the ground. It didn't run. It just walked. It reached the line between light and dark, and in one step it was gone. It didn't fade away. It just vanished into the blackness. The rig floor was silent for the first time all night. Someone had hit the kill switch on the main motor. In the sudden quiet, all four of us just stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been. Did you guys see that?" someone whispered. No one had to answer. We called the foreman on the radio. He came down from his office, and we all told him what we saw. He was a company man, through and through. He listened, his face a stone mask. When we were done, he told us we'd seen a large coyote, maybe a mountain lion, and our tired eyes were playing tricks on us. We argued. 4 of us saw the same thing. It was 8 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs. It had the head of a wolf. It wasn't a damn coyote. He told us to get back to work and that he'd make a report. The official report, we found out later, listed the incident as unidentified trespasser on pad, possibly a bear, scared off by crew. A bear. In the middle of the West Texas desert. they brought in extra security the next week. A couple of guys in a pickup truck with shotguns who would circle the perimeter all night. It was the company's way of acknowledging that something had happened without ever admitting what it was. None of the guys who saw it were the same after that. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a shared, unspoken trauma. We'd catch each other staring out into the darkness, looking for those yellow eyes. I couldn't take it. Every shadow, every strange noise sent a jolt of that same paralyzing fear through me. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt like it was hiding something, something that was just waiting, watching. I put in for a transfer a month later. I took a pay cut to go work on an offshore platform in the Gulf. I wanted to be surrounded by miles and miles of water. I wanted to be as far away from dry land, from that scrubland, from that darkness, as I could possibly get. I still have nightmares. I see it standing there under the lights. I see those intelligent, hateful yellow eyes staring up at me. I don't know what it is. The old-timers have names for things like that, skinwalkers, other legends. I just know that it's real, and it's out there in the dark, empty places of the world. And it's not afraid of us, not at all. And that's all the time we have for tonight. A genuine thank you to the people who trusted me with their experiences. And thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. I know these stories can be unsettling, but it's important that they're heard. If you enjoyed what you heard tonight, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone you think might appreciate it. If you're new here, think about subscribing for more stories like these. I read the comments, and I truly appreciate the conversations that happen there. The way you all support the storytellers and share your own thoughts is a huge part of what makes this community special. Please continue to be respectful of one another. As always, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other and stay safe out there. Watch over your loved ones. Keep your head on a swivel. I love each and every one of you. Until next time, my friends, and as always, good night.